I've completely shattered your life.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Expats episodes 1 and 2. Patrick Klepek, let's start real quick by talking about whether you think people should watch this show. What do you think, Patrick Klepek?
Oh, how sad do you want to be? I am quite taken by expats. I find myself drawn to sad stories. I use a lot of television and movies to experience catharsis and to work through my own emotional reactions to tragedies, like grief, imagined tragedies. I find that to be very therapeutic. And so Expats is a show that obviously has a great tragedy at the center of it that we don't know the complete details of, involving a missing child. And I find myself pretty taken by these characters, and the central mystery is the wrong term. It's not about, I don't think this is a show about finding answers necessarily, as much as it is a show about the messiness of processing grief. I think The Leftovers is like the quintessential show about grief and what it means to process it. It was a show that was very central to me processing the passing of my father. And so I find myself really taken to stories that portray grief as a very complicated, often toxic process. And so that being kind of the hook here of what does this family do? I find really compelling and interesting. And just, it's, it's Nicole Kidman. I will watch her in basically anything. And I think she's compelling here in the way she's compelling in so many other works. And so between the two of those things, I never heard of this show before you recommended we check it out. I know you were a fan of the showrunner's previous work, but yeah, I'm in. I'm here for the sadness, and I don't know where this show is going. I can imagine a lot of ways that it's potentially unsatisfying, but I'm surprisingly in so far on Expats, despite the completely dour nature of the whole endeavor.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to recommend it. It's a beautiful show, well acted, but yeah, it is quite depressing, and it does spend quite a bit of time luxuriating in sadness. And so that's just something you need to be aware of before you watch the show. But there's a lot of strong components. I would say I'm definitely more positive on this show than Masters of the Air.
Same.
But it's a little bit. It's not, I would say, a home run based on the 2 episodes we've seen so far. And one of the things I would say is it's quite theatrical, is what I would put it. And what I mean by that is a lot of the emotions feel exaggerated. It honestly feels like a play a lot of the time. And that can be a little bit distracting given how naturalistic a lot of the environments are in the show. So anyway, I would say overall it's worth checking out the first episode or 2. And obviously we don't know if it's going to add up to anything by the end, but there are some really strong performances and some really interesting subject matter here. So I'd say worth checking out. Let's talk about what actually happens in the episodes. In reading the plot descriptions from the website, in the first episode, The Peak, 3 expat women living in Hong Kong cross paths at a birthday party where it becomes evident they share a mysterious connection from their past. Then in episode 2, Mongkok, we learn 1 year earlier, Margaret and Mercy meet at an extravagant yacht party, forging an unlikely connection as Hillary wrestles with whether she wants to start a family. An incident occurs that will forever change the course of all of our characters' lives. End quote. So the show, I will say I was kind of irritated in the first episode because they kept referring to this big mystery of what happened. This big grief and tragedy and they keep referring to it over and over again. And I'm like, we get it. You haven't told us what it is. You want us to wonder what it is. Now, I'm glad that they got right to it. The second episode, the second episode explains everything that led up to the first episode. I don't know how I feel about this, Patrick Klepek. I think there's this concept in television of a backdoor pilot where you would but often it would happen late on in the season where it'd be flashback to before we knew any of these characters in episode 1. This is what happened. And it's interesting to have that happen in episode 2, as in the form of a flashback, pretty much, right? But what did you think of the structure? Because let's just put it this way: I think if they played the episodes in opposite order, it would not be as effective. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or it would not have the dramatic tension that you get achieved in episode 1. But at what cost is my question? What did you think of the episode order, Patrick Levick?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it would have been more effective as like a singular 90-minute like pilot that like got a little more to the point, because you're right. Like, okay, something happened to one of their kids. It's really traumatic. They're dealing with it or not dealing with it. But like, what are the details of what occurred? Because so much hinges on how did this happen? Like the loss of a child will be traumatic no matter what occurred, whether it was disease or an accident, like or something else. Like the having a child in the world, you brought into the world, you love, you care for, and then they're gone, especially at an excruciatingly young age. It's going to be traumatic. But like the details here matter, so we can connect with the characters like on their level. Like what are they experiencing, so I can have a sense of their interiority or like how I relate to them. And I think that gets at a lot of the issue is like by the time we get to where we're at in the show, which is all that's out right now, you know, we've seen the first 2 episodes. It's like, okay, I feel like the foundation has been laid, but I feel like that foundation could have happened significantly faster and
Right.
been just as effective. And so I find myself okay with where we ended up, but also in like rereading the summaries of the episodes, like in preparation for this, like, wow, we sure did a lot before we kind of figured out the whole hook of this show. And I hate to call the disappearance of a kid a hook, but I mean, this is what the show is going to center around, is this child Gus going missing, and what is the ripple effect on these characters. And so I'm with you that I sort of see in retrospect what the writer, showrunner, whatever the case may be, was going for, but I feel it kind of takes some of the tension out of the first episode, because I was like you, was like, I get it, but what happened? And not in a like intrigued way, and more of a
Like an annoyed way. Like
you are to the point,
right? You are
I want to
clearly
catch up to the characters.
Right. You are clearly withholding this information just to generate tension. And it's like, I'm trying to think of like, what would the circumstances be under which I would be like more okay with that, you know? And I think it would be like the question is, what is the purpose of starting the story where they do, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's just to draw out for the first hour this mystery of what happened. Was there any other function to that? I don't know. I do think if you played the episodes in reverse order, that it would feel a lot different. And I do think the second episode, or I should say, the first episode, which in my fictional world is your second episode in this alternate universe, would feel more tedious. You know, like it would be like, we just saw the thing happen. Now they keep talking about it over and over. Like, why do they keep referencing the thing that we just saw? You know, like I think it would feel more tedious. And so I don't know. I'm just not a fan of that. Like, I think if you're gonna play around with like withholding information like that, you should have a really good reason for it. And I don't know that the show um makes the case that it has a really good reason for it, right?
No, I agree. I think it, maybe that is to the show's broader sort of ethos of luxuriating, right? And I think this is there are times where luxuriating in a moment, I think luxuriating in grief, even if like performed to a exaggerated level, is okay, because but I think here this is where the show gets itself into some trouble, where it's just it feels long, and especially when that mystery is like the death, like I guess the mystery of what happened to this child. I don't know. I just found myself wishing the show had kind of sped up, and so like some version of like, it's like all the materials are here in these first 2 episodes. I just disagree with the order of operations. So like, I don't have a problem with these characters, these storylines, like where we're at with these characters. It's just the order of operations to get to everybody being on the same page to watch things play out from here. And so I guess maybe I'm a little more forgiving because I'm a mark for a story like this. Like I have two
Mhm.
kids. I think about it constantly, what it would be like if one of them was to walk away. You know, I was just at a function last night at my kid's school where it's like, hey, if we get separated and you're nervous, this is the spot we come back to. That's what we always talk about when we go somewhere that's crowded, is we pick an iconic spot that if you had to talk to a stranger or someone in
Mhm.
security, like this is the spot you tell them to come back to. Like this is where your parents said to go. And so I'm just like, I like sad stuff. I got kids. Sad kid stuff is like, okay, like I'm here to be sad and sit in this imaginary sad story. So that makes me really intrigued to see what comes next. Because now at least we've gotten to a place where I'm emotionally on the same page with all the characters. But I wouldn't blame anyone for getting 45 minutes in the first episode and going,
Like,
you know what I mean? Like this is kind of gonna be like your mileage may vary, and
right.
I think calling this show boring is not I think it's slow, and then it's just a matter of like where do you fall on
Yeah.
a lot of these different hooks on the show on whether you're going to be patient enough to get to where the show gets by the end of the second episode.
I'll just say one last thing about this whole ordering of the episodes, and then I'll move on. But it just occurred to me, the show that this podcast was based off of, Westworld. It used to be called
Mm-hmm.
Decoding Westworld, and the first episode of Westworld, you're introduced to, I think it's Teddy, played by James Marsden, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and he is like he is like the audience surrogate. He's like, oh, I'm coming into the old Westworld to like have a little adventure. And like the show fools you into thinking like he's going to be the protagonist of the show. And then of course you quickly find out he's not it's someone, it's other people are the protagonists. Um but that would be a reason why you would that's a reason why you would play the show in such a way that not all the information is available, is like it's from the perspective of someone who doesn't know, right? Like James Morrison's character doesn't know what's actually going on in that scene, right? And so then he finds out, and then it's like, oh, like you're finding out with him. Everyone in the show already knows what happened. Like, there's no one in the show who doesn't know what happened. So it's like it's just a bunch of people being like, "Hey, I know what happened, but you, the audience, don't know what happened yet." In the first episode. Okay, anyway, enough about that. I want to talk about a couple of other things that the show I think does interestingly. First of all, it's an incredibly beautiful show. Like,
Oh my god, yeah.
just every shot feels extremely well calibrated. Um, Obviously, the streets of Hong Kong are beautifully rendered, and the shot composition I think is overall just really strong. Um, the there's this kind of bookending construct of the show that I think is kind of interesting, where one of the characters of the show, Mercy, introduces the show by saying, "Hey, do you ever wonder about all these people who like ended up causing these tragedies?" Like, and she goes through these stories of people who like caused their twin brother to be paralyzed or accidentally murdered someone or whatever, right? And she's like, we never hear about those people. We always hear about the victims. What about the people who did the terrible thing, by accident? And we get the sense that this is what that story is going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's like kind of interesting. Like it's like, oh, like it's an interest. It's something I've wondered about, and it's something that like is. But it's interesting that the show kind of that there's this other meta layer, like stuff that's not take. As far as we know, she's not a journalist working on this project. This is just her
Mm-hmm.
talking directly to the audience, fourth wall breaking stuff. So I think that's kind of it was fine. It worked for me, but it's just like it's not a typical thing that happens in all shows. So I thought it was worth pointing out. Um, and then the show makes like a bunch of interesting creative decisions, artistic decisions. Like the final shots of episode 2, I thought were really beautiful, where it's this flashback that Nicole Kidman's having, and then you see kind of what the night market is at various points in time, and how one location can have all these different significances depending on when and what circumstances you intersect with it. I thought that was a really beautiful way to end that episode. I'll say one other thing I wanted to mention, which is I like that. I think Gus is the name of the child,
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, wow, this child is pretty irritating. And also like reminds me of my nephew when he starts like throwing tantrums, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes like these kids get into this headspace that they can't get out of, right? Where
I'm
they're like
well
just
aware.
like
I got a 3-year-old who
yeah,
is well in the throes of that
right.
emotional state.
Right. And they just get this and they can't get out of this, it takes them like an hour to like calm down. And I was thinking, wow, like Gus is really irritating, but then I was thinking, wow, that kid is actually an extremely good actor because there's plenty of times when he's not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so he must be able to like control it to some degree, or maybe they only took the best takes or whatever. But I basically just like I have all the praise for Gus's child acting. I thought it was really good. And what do you think about the character of Gus, Patrick Wilson?
How many times do you think they like the sequence where he is wearing his like Transformers costume and he can
Mm-hmm.
turn himself from the robot into the car? I have to imagine he was like, how many takes did they have where it's like, all right, Gus is back in the car again. Like, no, Gus, get out of the car. No, Gus is back in the car, because it's
Yeah.
such a cool little bit. I have to imagine
Right.
there's just like an hour of like trying to corral Gus into like doing the take, and he's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go back into this little robot. I mean, I think he's a very believable,
Right.
irritating 3-year-old. I don't think they state
Very,
Gus's
very
age.
adorable too. Very cute kid.
So is my child. My 3-year-old I adore, and she is like equal part. Like that age is there's a reason they call it can call it a three-nager for a reason, is because
Mhm.
they have the emotional intelligence to know what they like and don't like, but not the emotional intelligence to control like these feelings that they have.
Yeah.
And so you have kids that are physically capable, emotionally unstable, and that creates very volatile situations for the people that are around them, that is only exaggerated by the circumstances of like the family, by having like explicit help that is essentially a co-parent role. I don't
Mhm.
have experience like parenting that way. Of help like in the event that like I have like babysitters or friends, or my mother that helps occasionally, but like it's me and my wife. And I think the really fascinating dynamic with the family here is having someone that is so ever present in the family's lives that they graduate. There's a reason that they call her family, because this is not just someone who comes through and sweeps the floors. This is somebody who like cooks, cleans, reads books at night. Like this is much more intertwined emotionally with the lives of these children. But yeah, I was a fan of Gus, because I can see so much of my kid in him, and then but maybe that didn't help with my reaction then to Gus wandering off, because I could 100% sing my dipshit kid do the exact like it takes no time at all
5 seconds.
for
5 seconds, and then it's over,
one
right? Like,
one absolutely, like and I think about that a lot as we're gearing up for a trip to Disney in March, where it's just like it's just so easy. It is so easy for me to empathize with what happens there, and also frankly with the girl who gets distracted. Like you're on your phone. I mean, it's just it's a ugh.
I really love that whole sequence because Mercy's trying to figure out, oh, should I pay for the meal? And then she goes out, and then I think she's texting her friend like, should I charge for this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it just really does a good job of capturing how your concerns in life can change rapidly,
Yeah.
right? Like in that moment, she's like, should I ask Nicole Kidman for money? And then like literally 10 minutes later, it's like, you'll be lucky if like she doesn't press charges against you, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I just thought that was like a really nice like touch of like, it's not like Mercy is being an asshole, but her concerns are just completely not where they should be.
Right.
And I think it's like that's often the case of it. We don't see the danger coming in our lives, like when the danger arrives. Um, so that part really resonated with me of being like, should I charge her for this? And then the kid goes missing, So
Well, and obviously she's not a parent. She's kind of a sitter, like a caretaker in this situation. But I mean, like as a parent, you're always making calculated choices on like there's so many things to be distracted by, a device or something else, and you are not always 100% paying it. I mean, so I was actually like deeply sympathetic to that situation where like, I mean, God, I hope nothing similar happens to me, but you're always taking calculated risks with your you're not always 100% paying attention to the child. You're sort of assuming
Right.
they'll be in the orbit, and then you hope you don't have tragedy strike. And in this case, tragedy does strike.
Do you have any like tracking devices, Patrick Klepek? Like, maybe like an AirTag wristwatch, anything like that you're considering?
We so I was one of the things my wife and I talked about a lot when we had our oldest was we desperately did not want to become helicopter parents. Like I grew up in an era pre-cell phones,
Yeah.
pre-tracking, and parents just had to, like you just had to, I mean, you might get into trouble, but like you were out doing stuff. And these days you can know everything about your kids' lives. And so I think
Right.
it becomes incumbent on the parent to draw lines for themselves. And I try to draw upon like, how did I feel as a kid and how would I feel if my parents had access to that
Right.
kind of information? So I remember the first time that my oldest, had to take a bus. Had to take a bus from her daycare to school, and then would go to school, and then had to catch a bus from the school back to the daycare. And there are people out there helping, but like there's a lot on the kid to follow the instructions and do all that. And I had a spare AirTag, so I did throw it in her bag and just kind of tucked it away in a corner. And then eventually she found it. It was like, "What's this?" And I like took it out. I was like slightly embarrassed. But for a month or so, it gave me great comfort to just be able to see she made it to the daycare. She made it back to the school because it was just in her backpack and she always knew she had to take that. Um, and but like there were other situations where I remember the first time she asked me if she could go to her best friend's house, which is a neighbor's about 3 houses down. And it was like in the summer, we don't have a busy street. And she's like, "Could I go by myself?" And she was 5. And I remember I asked my wife, I was like, "I think she can go down the street. We'll watch her from the window." And then it was just the two of us giving her permission, but then also watching from the window. She totally did her job. And then the second time that she asked that, I forced myself to not look, and I sat on the couch and I just like sat there for a couple of minutes, and then like texted my neighbor. And I was like, "Did she get there?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, good job, Patrick. Like you've let her out of sight and she crossed the street by herself, but it's
I mean,
hard.
you did check immediately afterwards, but you
I
didn't
did,
watch
but
it the
like
whole way.
you kind of
Yeah.
have to check yourself as a parent because
Right.
there's so much more you can do, and I think be invasive in your children's lives. And it's important to me that my children, like the world is full of danger, and they got to figure it out themselves to some degree. But it's always that's a tough line to navigate, and it's different for each parent for sure.
It's wild to consider in light of, we were children of the '80s, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
so much different. Your parents would not even like look. They wouldn't even consider looking. It'd be like, "Get the f out of the house!" Like, "Oh,
Well,
you're going
how
down
would
the
they
street.
track you?
Goodbye.
Like,
Yeah,
I guess they could
bye.
call the couple of friends that you know,
Yeah,
but if you drove your bike to the mall, like,
yeah.
what are they going to
Oh,
do?
you're going to the mall. Going to the mall, mom. Bye. You won't hear from me in 5 hours. Hopefully, nothing terrible happened. Like
Yeah.
that's
Well,
what
what
that's what it was.
one of my parents' big rules, there was this indoor mall about a mile from our house, but to get there was a really dangerous collision course intersection. Like there were just like 7 streets that collided this one light. And so my mom was like, "You are not allowed. You are not old enough to go to that mall." And I was like, "Okay." But in between the mall and across one of the busy roads was a McDonald's. But we were also not, she was like, "That one busy road is just one of the 2 busy roads. You're banned from going across either of those busy roads. You have to be driven there if you're going to go to the mall. You just cannot be trusted." And so, of course, at one point, I went with all my dirtbag friends, and we went to McDonald's. And as we are getting out of the McDonald's, my mom happened to be like going to the grocery store, and it was like slow mo. You could like see your life fracturing into a million pieces as she slow rolls up. And my mom didn't really swear, and she was just like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And it's like, "All right, guys, well, I'm gonna leave. Yeah, I'm screwed. I probably won't see you guys for a couple of weeks." And immediately got grounded. Fair to be. I screwed up, but got just caught in the most embarrassing,
Yeah.
hilarious. My friends were going, ooh. And my mom's like, I'm going to call your parents too. You're all in trouble. So
Yeah, it was a double-edged sword. Basically, you would be unsupervised. It sounds like when I was in college, and we were taking exams, and the person, he's like, "Hey, here's the situation. No one watches you when you take your exams. Like, no one like proctors or anything to make sure you're not cheating. But the flip side is, if you do cheat, you are in huge trouble, and your life will probably be ruined. Like, that's kind of the less supervision you have, like the worse consequences are when something terrible happens.
yes.
So anyway. All right, expats. Anything else to say about the first couple episodes? I think, again, the first episode, I was just talking about how theatrical it was. A lot of the emotions felt very, like, oh, I'm seeing Nicole Kidman at a party and I'm freaking out. But by the way, my reaction to seeing Nicole Kidman at a party, but for different reasons. And Nicole Kidman like accosting this woman, and it just felt like very like, you know. Very. It felt like I was watching it on a like watching a play on a stage. Of like these people being like, the emotions are so big, and like in general, I don't think people process things this way. I think it's much more subtle the way people react to other people who have been in tragic situations like this. So over the top feels like a little too extreme, I think, to describe what I'm feeling, but it just felt very like heightened in a way that I thought was a little bit distracting, given how grounded a lot of the show feels.
Yeah, I agree. It's a little melodramatic.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel consistent with the tone of the rest of the show.
I'll also just say one thing. There's this character named Essie who is the kind of housekeeper. A lot of nice touches with Essie. First of all, the child being very attached to the housekeeper, I thought was very apt. Also, the child speaking Tagalog, which is like her language. It's not and I think the show is very specific, right? Mercy is Korean, but she's living in Hong Kong, and Gus is speaking Tagalog, which is not any of the languages that are otherwise spoken in the household. So there's like a lot of specificity in how that's all plays out, and so I thought that was all very plausible. And Nicole Kidman's character saying like, "Oh, she's like family." It's very, very patronizing. It's very, very like she thinks she's reaffirming how good she is as a person for like befriending and making this person part of their family. But it's like, no, it's like when your workplace says we're all a big family.
Yep.
It's like when you're at the office and they're like, "Welcome to the Jiffy Lube family," and it's like it's not really a family, and it's very patronizing when you say it that way. And I am curious, like, to what degree this show is going to be a critique of the rich. I think it hasn't really been that much so far. Like all the two of the characters are rich, one of them isn't, and I'm curious, like, to what extent class is going to be commented on in the show. Other than like this general, like, they're kind of oblivious, which is what it is right now. But like, I don't know that it's going to be anything beyond that. Patrick Klepek, any other thoughts on anything I've said or Expats episodes 1 and 2?
No, but I will probably keep up with it to some degree. I don't know if I'll keep pace week to week, but I'm I want to watch at least one more episode to get a sense of what the arc of the show. I feel like if they get one more, the show is going to have to tip its hand a little bit on like where are we going and like where are these storylines threaded together. And I want to give it at least one more before I decide to kind of punt from it entirely. But I'm intrigued enough to keep watching. And like I said, the sadness intrigues me.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.